I'm back on the caffeine and ready to finally tell you all about how I hacked into my readers' brains. Mwahaha! Welcome everybody to a Latte Words, where we sip coffee and talk about words. I am so excited to finally talk about the dissertation that I wrote for my master's degree in English language and linguistics. Hopefully, during my editing, I will figure out how to do that cool little bar thing that's like a table of contents at the bottom so you can skip around if you want. This is probably going to be my longest video, and it might be a little bit heavy on the academics, so I decided to leave a little Easter egg for you. Somewhere buried in this video is B-roll of me pouring coffee very artistically. Think of it as a caffeine pick-me-up, but for your eyes. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a very clear disclaimer. So this isn't scientifically proven. The methods that I used to gather my research and to make my arguments were not double-blind studies that are rigorously retested over and over. This is much softer, and it's basically a liberal arts perspective on gathering information. So I'm not claiming that anything that I say here is 100% scientifically accurate. I'm sure there are many ways that you can argue against what I've found and find different perspectives, and I encourage you to leave a comment below if you notice that maybe I made a mistake on something during my research, because I do intend to continue reading different books and looking at my hypothesis and seeing if it stands up to these books and the quality of the book and the readership. So leave me a comment if you have any feedback or advice, whatever, please let me know. As you know from previous videos, I have been writing for my entire life, of course, but then as an adult, I've been writing for about 10 years, trying to get published. And it's been a bit of a rocky road. I simply haven't found an agent or a publisher who wants to take on any of my books, and it was getting frustrating. So my other passion is teaching English as a second language. And I knew that in order to continue on that road, I needed to get a master's degree. And I found this great degree program in London, and I decided to move here, and that's a whole other video I'm gonna get into later probably. If you're interested, let me know in the comments. But I started this program thinking that it was mainly going to be about progressing my teaching career. Instead, my heart led me back to literature and writing. So I used this program, which was English language and linguistics, to focus on cognitive linguistics and how that can affect a reader's interpretation and appreciation of a book. Basically, I wanted to hack into readers' brains and figure out why they like one book over a different book. Obviously, it's not that simple. It's never that simple. And there are so many reasons why someone might like one book and not another. But I wanted to kind of see if cognitive linguistics and certain elements within that can slightly alter things for a reader. And that, my friends, leads us to schema theory. Schema theory was the basis of my entire dissertation and all of my research, and I'm going to now explain to you exactly what it is in the simplest terms possible. The thing is, you probably already know the gist of schema theory. It's the blueprint for living that we've built throughout our lives. Another way I like to put it is it's an instruction manual to help us get through our day, to help us navigate certain social situations, or really any situation in our lives. So one of the researchers that I cited very, very often within this dissertation, because he's huge in the field for this, is Guy Cook. And the way that he explains schema theory is a new experience understood in comparison with a stereotypical version of a similar experience held in memory. So basically comparing two different experiences and seeing how they're similar or deviant from each other. So of course, the example I'm going to be using is a cafe environment. If you have experience with or are native to a dominant modern culture, you probably have an idea of what it's going to be like when you enter a cafe. So close your eyes. Imagine walking into your favorite cafe in the morning. What do you see? For me, I would expect to see a line, or in the UK, we call it a queue, of people waiting to make their order. But what if today, instead of a queue, the cafe has implemented a tallest person first rule? Basically, the tallest person waiting to order is the one who gets served first. So even if a taller person comes in after a shorter person, they get served first. How do you think you would feel? I mean, for me personally, I would be very angry because I'm very short and I would never ever get my coffee. Another feeling that we may all feel is confusion. And that's basically our brains processing what we expected to happen versus what actually happened. Within schema theory, this is called disruption. But in your experience, standing in a queue or a line is considered normal. And that is considered schema preservation. And our brains do kind of crave that in order to continue working and living in our day-to-day lives. However, sometimes our brains really want to escape that pattern and they need to test out different situations in order to learn and grow. And that is where fiction actually can come into play. Fiction turns into this safe space we can use in order to maybe test some of our beliefs or our ideas and see things from different perspectives. So a lot of researchers in this field say that if fiction is considered a safe place for you to test out different ideas, then there does need to be a certain amount of schema disruption within our books in order for readers to really enjoy them. That's why sometimes you might say that a book is really boring if there's way too much description. So I actually wrote a blog post on this whole topic that I will link below so you can get an example of what I'm talking about and why it's so boring and it's going to be hard for you to read. But basically, that schema preservation where maybe you describe every single thing going on in that cafe, like the guy walks up to the barista, then describing how the menu works, describing how the payment works. We already know those things. Our brains are able to basically fill in that information without help. If we give our brains too much help in that sense, then it becomes boring and repetitive. On the other side of the spectrum though, if we're given too little information, of course we're going to be confused, we're probably going to be angry, and our brains are not going to be able to fill in what's needed in order for us to visualize a scene and become immersed in the book. So basically, we need a good balance of preservation and disruption in order for the reader to enjoy a book. And that's where schema refreshment comes in. So basically, schema refreshment is a little bit of disruption, and that disruption helps change the way that you see the world in some way. It could be something as minor as, for me, I now use the word queue instead of line in order to function within UK society. Of course, it can also be much bigger than that. It can be full philosophies and life choices that can be refreshed. The one more simplistic example, if we go back to that cafe environment, is let's say that a reader has always had this idea that baristas hate their jobs, they're just kids, maybe they're just trying to fund their way through college and they don't care about their customers. So he goes into the cafe every day, he doesn't make any conversation, he just gives his order, takes his coffee and goes. Maybe he reads a book about a guy who goes into his local cafe every day and he has a great relationship with a barista. And this barista is actually in love with her job and this is her career. And she wants to one day own her own coffee shop. And she's so enthusiastic about coffee that she's fun to talk to. The reader may not even notice this, but maybe the next day he walks into his coffee shop and strikes up a conversation with the barista who has been serving him this whole time, because maybe she actually does have a lot to say about coffee or has some sort of passion that he never thought about before. And that's an example of schema refreshment. Basically, the gist of schema refreshment is that certain elements within a book or a story stick to you, which is something we all strive for. I know as writers, we're already trying to do this, but I wanted to look into this a little bit more specifically and see if there's a really good balance between schema disruption and preservation that we can all attain and do it a little bit more consciously. So of course, figuring out how to give our readers schema refreshment is so tricky because we're all so individual and our experiences and situations in life are as individual as our DNA. So it's kind of impossible to promise that whatever mode of schema disruption or preservation we use to get refreshment is going to work for every reader. I'm definitely not saying that this is something that is a blueprint that everybody can use and it's going to work on everybody, because that's impossible. But that also doesn't mean that there aren't larger universal sets of schema that bigger audiences have. And that's where we get into the two books that I focused on during my dissertation. The first one is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that. I've only ever read his name. It's one of those only ever read the word and you never actually speak it. His schema disruption is a great example of something that the wider audience all shares. So I think it's safe to say that we would cringe at the idea of cloning humans and using those clones as organs and harvesting those organs for other humans. It's a little bit messed up and philosophically, at the very least, a gray area, if not completely wrong, right? But Ishiguro is able to figure out how to slowly ease his readers into this idea through Kathy, who's our protagonist. And she's so calm and complacent, even though she knows she's a clone and she knows her organs are going to be harvested to the point where she will die at a very young age. She just goes about her day like it's normal. And it almost sort of changes the reader's perspective and makes them start to think that that's normal. So in my dissertation, I argue that the readers were cognitively primed to get used to this idea. And what was interesting is, even though this book was extremely similar in very, very many ways to the other book that I looked at during my dissertation, it was extremely popular with the wider audience. Lots of people loved it. And you've probably heard of this book too, because it was so popular. It was made into a movie, and generally people took away a lot from it. On the other hand, the other book that I looked at during my dissertation, which was J by Howard Jacobson, didn't do as well. Even though it was a similar genre, they were both up for the same awards, both written around the same time. J was just too much on the side of schema disruption for readers to be able to appreciate the story. And again, I've got my full blog posts of both my full dissertation and a summary of that dissertation in the description below if you want a little bit more information about that. And that's why there's this special balance between disruption and preservation that as writers we want to try to find. And I'm still working on this myself by reading other books and comparing and looking at how the disruption versus the preservation works within the stories and how other readers react to these stories. I did write up a little worksheet for myself in order to keep these ideas in mind as I write, and I actually share that worksheet with anybody who signs up to my mailing list. So if you want to sign up for my mailing list, I'll leave a link below for that. Of course, it's absolutely free. Like, I'm not going to charge you for this stuff because obviously it's not even like 100% foolproof or anything. I'm learning this myself. But if you would like that sheet as well, I'm so happy to share it with you. So I hope all of this made sense to you. I'm sure on some sort of intuitive level, you kind of already knew about this, but sometimes it's also good to just voice these things and put names and titles to them, like schema refreshment, in order for you to consciously be working on getting to that goal of having your story stick with your reader. So did you enjoy hearing about the sort of heavy academic side of fiction writing? If so, let me know in the comments. Hit like, please subscribe, because I can continue talking about this in more detail, or I can look into other sides of cognitive linguistics and how it affects readers. Thank you so much for watching today. Bye!